Hi, everybody. This is Chip Coldren. I'm going to start the meeting, okay? I'll tell you this before I introduce things, that we have a very capable web administrator who's on the top of the list here, Vivian Chu. So if you have difficulties or questions about muting and things like that, just send her a little note in the chat room and she'll respond. So welcome, everybody. I think many of you have been in on other webinars that we posted in the recent past, so this little introduction is going to sound a bit familiar, but I should say a few things. Today we're going to hear from Nola Joyce from the Philadelphia Police Department on the issue of sustainability of innovations and sustainability of our efforts to achieve organizational change or innovation. And you probably know this. I can tell from the experience I've had with smart policing sites up till now that this is one of the most challenging issues that we face. I think most of us, including the funders and the recipients of funding, are very much accustomed and accultured to the fact that we get a certain amount of money for a specific period of time and we perform on what we said we would do, and we don't always think about how to continue with the work that we're doing if the federal government is not funding it. And I think, as Nola Joyce will suggest, we don't always think if we even should sustain it. So there are some really challenging issues and some important questions that Nola's going to raise over the next hour or so. I want you to, as you always do, give her your full attention. There are several chances in this webinar for people to ask questions and to chime in. I encourage you to do that. I'm going to reserve the right to call a few people out if I want to and ask them to say a few things. And we do have this little chat function. And so if you're not getting your voice over the line or you just want to say something, please feel free to use the chat to ask questions or to make suggestions. We pay a lot of attention to that. I do want to say a couple other things. As you know, these webinars are recorded. We plan to repeat them in the future. And so what you say will be there for the entire world to hear anytime from here on in. So just be mindful of that. At the end of this webinar, Vivian Chu will send everybody a brief session evaluation form. We encourage you to use that. And that's one way that we solicit information from all of you about what other things we should be putting on the webinar series. So please pay attention to that. And as I said, Nola will be very disappointed if you don't ask her some questions and challenge her on some of the things that she's going to tell us today. So I do want to say a few words about Nola. Nola's the Smart Policing Coordinator at the Philadelphia Police Department. Chief of Operations there. I think in my circle of professional friends, if anybody has been working on sustainability of innovation in policing over the last 20 years or so, it's Nola Joyce. She did it in Chicago. She did it in Washington, D.C. She's now doing it in Philadelphia, achieving, in my view, pretty remarkable results. I know she's not happy all the time. But she's doing very good work and very hard work, and she honestly takes this sustainability issue quite seriously, which is, of course, why we asked her to present to us today. So, Nola, let me turn it over to you, and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you, Chip, and good afternoon, everyone. So, as Chip has said, we're going to be spending the next 90 minutes or so talking about sustainability, or how do we keep what works working. And that is a key question, isn't it? We work hard and we do a lot, and to think about the fact that maybe our efforts won't survive is a difficult proposition to entertain. So we're going to talk about a series of topics. But before we get into that, Chip introduced me a little bit, and let me just add a few things to that. I am a Deputy Commissioner in Philadelphia for the Philadelphia Police Department, and I have the Office of Strategic Initiatives and Innovation. And as Chip said, I am also the project coordinator for our smart policing initiatives. I started out in policing back in Chicago, back in the mid-'90s, and worked there for about 6 years, and then went to the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. for about 10, and I've been here in Philadelphia for 8. As Chip said, much of what I do is around designing and implementing and sustaining change in these large police organizations. So what I'm going to share with you over the next few minutes is my experience in those cities. And also, you will hear during the conversation information that you might have already looked at from the 2 readings that you were provided. One was actually a website, JISC, Sustaining and Embedding Innovation, a Good Practice Guide. I found this guide to be very useful and very practical. It really resonated with me as I went through the various pages, and really would recommend this if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. It does focus on the educational sector, but change is change, and so is sustainability. So I found their ideas and principles to really resonate with the work that I have done. So I encourage you to take a look at that website. The other reading is a chapter written by Schneider, Brief, and Goosels, and it's on creating the climate for sustainable organizational change. And it really focuses on changing the organization, changing the people, if you will, within the organization in order to sustain innovation and change in the organization. So as we work through here, because 10 is a nice round number, I have 10 big ideas. Some are bigger than others, and I guess that means some are smaller. But let me just, in a quick overview, tell you about the 3 main sections that we're going to work through here. First, we will define what sustainability is and talk about what it is and what it is not, and why we want to sustain our efforts, what's driving that motivation. Then we'll take a look at the scope of our efforts and what it means for sustainability. And once we've defined and scoped our efforts, we then will talk about creating a sustainability plan. And finally, and throughout, I will share with you what's happening here in Philadelphia and what we're doing in order to make some major change and working to embed it in our organization. Now, in order to make this time worth your time, it really would be helpful if you participate in the conversation. Feel free to ask questions and certainly participate in the discussion. I have to say it's kind of weird sitting here talking on the phone and looking at my computer screen and thinking I'm talking to somebody, but I'm not quite sure.
You are.
Good. Good to hear. So,
yes, hi, Nola. This is Dr. Bill Pottinger from Intuitex and Rutgers University.
Oh, good. Good to hear you, Doctor. How about some others out there?
No, don't start that.
Oh, come on. Just yell out a few. And if not your name, at least your city that you're representing.
Kansas City, Missouri, Mark Russo and Pat Rousey.
Good to hear you.
Likewise.
All right.
Elizabeth Creo from Port Police, Los Angeles.
All right. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm having a problem viewing the conference, so I can hear you. I just don't see anything on my screen. So maybe someone can call me.
Okay. I think maybe Vivian can help you out.
Okay.
All right.
This is David Choate from ASU. I'm having the same problem viewing. I can hear you fine though. So.
Okay. All right. So I think there are some fellow Philadelphians also participating. So feel free to jump in at any point to illustrate or comment on what I'm saying. No pride of authorship, and certainly a sharing of all the hard work everyone is doing here in Philadelphia. Okay, so Vivian is going to control the slides for me. So the next slide, Vivian. All right, so let's start with a matter of definition. So first of all, we've got to talk about what do we mean when we say sustainability. I think sometimes we think it's fairly straightforward. And so I'm going to use the definition that the JISC website used. Next slide. And that definition suggests that sustainability is about embedding change in the organization so that it survives over time. All right, we get that, right? So what we're doing we think is worth doing, and we want to make sure it continues. So that is certainly a key part of sustainability. But there's not all of it. Next slide. What I found is that the second half of the definition really, in my mind, provoked some interesting thoughts, and hopefully it'll do the same. Because JISC suggests it's not just about making sure that the change that you're working on survives. That's not the purpose. The survival of your change effort is because you want to continue to achieve the results or the outcomes that you have already achieved. In other words, sustainability is about embedding change in order to produce the desired outcomes that you've already seen, and maybe even better outcomes. So that second part of the definition is kind of pushes us back a little bit, I think. So it's not about doing what we're doing. It's about doing what we're doing in order to get the outcomes that we want. So, next slide. So what is sustainability not? Well, change won't survive forever, right? And if it does, then what we've become is the tradition. Like the revolutionary that becomes the government, who only with over time thrown over again. So, hang on. I said because there we go, I'm back. So all things must come to an end. So sustainability is not surviving forever. That's not what we're talking about. It's not about getting more funding in order to survive. Okay, so you want to hang up now, right? And it's not about maybe maintaining everything that you've done. Maybe what you've discovered is that some of the things you've tried don't work, and that's okay. So sustainability is, again, about maintaining what works because it achieves the outcomes. It improves your ability to achieve your mission. That's what sustainability is about. Next slide. So, 3 rules for sustainability. When you're doing sustainability, really what you're doing is you're learning, you're adapting, and you're innovating. Because, again, our focus is on achieving outcomes, not on maintaining a program structure or a process or a change for the sake of the program, the process, or the change. So questions that you might ask as you move from implementing to sustaining, and as you move from sustaining to innovation and back again. Are you achieving the results that you set out to achieve? Are you still achieving them? Are your efforts worth the outcome? And where's the resistance coming from? These are the kinds of questions you want to ask yourself throughout implementation and throughout the entire project, because they will lead you to build a more effective sustainability plan, which we'll talk about later. Embedding the change in the organization in order to continue to achieve or improve on the results from the original outcomes is what sustainability is really about. That's the definition that we're using. And again, it's the one that comes from JISC website there. So you have to be willing to assess your efforts, to learn, to adapt and change, and to innovate. So it's about the change lasting long enough. Long enough for what? Long enough to get the results. long enough to learn, long enough to know what the next steps are. It's not forever. It's just long enough. All right, next slide. I see from Chip that on diversifying your funding sources, and I think, yes, that's important. I will talk about that in just a little bit. It's not about getting new resources, but it's probably more, and especially in these days, about reallocating existing resources. So why sustain the change? You have to be clear why you want to do it. You probably had a very clear reason why you started out on this project, why you wanted to apply for the grant, and why you're working so hard to achieve the results that you laid out. You have to be as clear when we talk about sustainability. Next slide. So don't lose sight of why the change was initiated in the first place. Hold that up. Put it up on your board. Look at it every day. Am I achieving what I intended to achieve? If not, why not? If so, why? Again, it gets us back to our definition. We are sustaining our efforts because we are expecting and producing better results than the results we had without driving the change in the first place. Next slide. Okay, so what about an example? One of the primary missions of policing, I think, is to prevent crime. Now, we know that there are several evidence-based ways and projects and methods and means of preventing crime. Here in Philadelphia, we discovered that footbeats was an effective way to reduce violent crime. This is a discovery, if you will, that went against the common knowledge. The famous footbeat study in Newark suggested that footbeats may make the community feel better, may improve relationships between the police and the community, but it really didn't do anything for crime. Not so is right, because what we learned by doing an experimental design, we put out 250 brand new police officers on footbeats in our hottest areas in the city. And we matched those areas that looked just like them, but we couldn't put footbeats on them. Temple did the research, and what they found is that footbeats reduced violent crime by 12%. We learned something. We learned something we didn't know, and for that reason, footbeats is now part of how we do policing here in Philadelphia. It is resource intensive, but the outcomes show that the resources were more than necessary. We also know that hotspots are an effective way of reducing crime, and then there's intelligence-led policing that shows that there's some evidence there. So what is the best approach to prevent crime? Well, it all depends, right? It depends on what Schneider and Brief and Gussel suggest about the climate and the culture of our departments. Some departments may be better suited for different approaches. That's okay. Just be aware of what that might be. It might vary by the nature or the type of crime you're trying to prevent. Is a strategy different if it's violent than if it's a burglary? So there's no single approach to prevent crime, multiple approaches. The point around sustainability here is that if you become dogmatic, if your bosses become dogmatic, if your organization does, and only says the only way we fight crime is by X, then this is not what we talk about sustainability. Because what that is surviving for the sake of the program, for the sake of the approach, not for the sake of result. All right, so now, what do you think? Do you buy the definition? Is it both? Is it surviving for the sake of the outcomes or not? When is change worth sustaining? Next slide.
Nola, are you posing a question for the audience?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. This is Dr. Pottinger again from, excuse me, from Intuitex and also Rutgers University. And actually, what you're talking about really connects, actually, because I think just about any organization, any human organization, can become susceptible to existing for the sake of the program, as opposed to existing for their primary purpose. And it's interesting because I think this is true, in all areas of life, whether it's our work life, even family life, or even our life of faith. I think we can get to the point where we sort of lose the initial motivation and purpose and focus, and end up just having a program. And I think your point is well made, that just working or living for the purpose of the program really defeats the purpose, the original purpose.
Exactly. Thank you. Anyone else? Someone disagree?
Well, you're not going to disagree with that. This is Dr. Hensgen. I'm the Assistant Chief of New Haven. When you talk in terms of when is change worth sustaining, you have to address value. And the question is, because, again, we're all dealing with limited resources, is what you're doing sustainable because the value is of such magnitude that you're willing to initiate change to begin with? Because as you well know, it's not the change that affects a lot of these things. It's the transition. And when the transition is interrupted, sustainability is out of the question. So the question is one of value. Whether or not whatever you're doing, does it actually serve a purpose for the department or for the community?
I totally agree with you. And how we determine the value, how we show it, and how we measure it is really a key part of a sustainability plan. We've here in Philadelphia, we've been talking about sustainability, not just within police, but also city programs. And really, for us, the bottom line becomes, the mayor's going to change, for example. We know that. We have term-limited mayor. So how do we ensure that the programs and the efforts that we think really are bringing value are sustained for the next administration? The answer, and I think probably the only answer in this situation perhaps, is that we're going to make it so valuable to the community that whoever the next mayor will be, that community won't let the mayor change that program. If it doesn't bring that kind of value, it should change. It shouldn't survive. So I totally agree with you.
Nola, this is Jack Charlier from Chicago. I just wanted to comment also, and I appreciate you just used the word community. So the idea of sustainability from an organization's internal perspective for many public agencies obviously has to also be viewed from the lens of the community, the elected officials, and that's where their understanding of it may be different than internal. So I would just throw that out, that tension that exists, that even though internally we see and understand the value, and as much as we try to get it out there to our external stakeholders to see the value, they may see it through a different lens. And so I appreciate that you just said community, because that is huge in a public agency, obviously.
Yes. And another word that is huge is stakeholders, which, again, as you think through developing and executing a sustainability plan, that's one of the areas you really have to think about and focus on, is who are those stakeholders and how do you influence them? All right, anyone else? All right, next slide. So this section is about the level of effort or scope of what you're doing. I divide it into three. Nothing magical there, it just helps me think about it. I think in terms of a program, a process or technology, and organization or changing the people within the organization. So, next slide. So, what type of change are you focused on and want to sustain? Now, these aren't clean categories, and there'll be crossovers as you're here and as we will talk, that sometimes when I'm talking about what it takes to sustain a process is very similar to maybe what it takes to sustain organizational change and vice versa and for a program. But in descriptive terms, a program is what I think here in policing we often do. That is, if we have a problem, we create a special unit, we form a task force, we go get a grant, and we form this standalone program to attack the problem. Now that's okay. I mean, we got to do what we got to do. But when you begin to talk about sustainability, it's easy to do a program and maybe a little harder to sustain a program, because a program tends to have very specific focus and desired results. And once those are achieved, do you need to sustain the program? If it's a standalone, a task force, it often requires, or you get funded from outside resources, or you borrow employees for a time to do this work. Then the resources disappear. For example, here in Philadelphia, we started something called Operation Pressure Point. It involved 17 different agencies, federal, state, and local. And it was focused on when we were having high violent crime, when and where. No surprise, weekend hours, and they tend to be around bars. So this task force would focus on the weekend nights, and around bars, and had pretty dramatic effect the first year. Everybody was involved, everybody participated, from all the alphabet soups in the feds to the state police and to city agencies. Second year, funding started getting a little tight, and the level of participation began to drop. We didn't sustain the results that we had from the first year. The third year, which was last year, was, to be fair, basically non-existent. We had no overtime. The feds were losing their additional funding. The state police had other problems. Our city agencies also lost funding. And so this terrific program had dynamic impact on the first year, withered away because there was no sustainability implementation plan put in place. It was just, as long as we had the money, we could do the program. So it's about planning for the future as you begin to implement now. A process or technology is usually cuts across multiple units in an organization and maybe across organizations, just by its own definition. So, for example, if you're changing the way in which detectives maybe investigate and handle domestic violence, you initially think, well, that's a detective. Detective units are responsible for that, and nothing else is affected. But as you begin to think it through, that's not right, because information coming in from a 911 call is important. How the police officer handles the call is extremely important, the information he gathers. How the detective communicates and passes off the information to the DA is important if that is going to be prosecuted and stood up in court. So what you begin to understand is that you might have started with what you thought is a program, but you end up with something much bigger. That you're changing a multi-unit, multi-agency process. And when you do that, by definition, you have to bring in stakeholders and people from across the agency. And as you're changing it, you're also beginning to embed the sustainability of a process in technology. Technology, if we get new technology, it's going to be new technology for the next 20 years, right? In the police department anyway. So that tends to be able to be sustained for a longer period of time, and the sustainability effort is built in as you design and implement the change effort. The last level is organizational, or really changing the way in which the organization does its job. And you're changing the way people people act and behave within the organization. And this is difficult. It's a very difficult change effort. It's a difficult sustainable effort, because here you're talking about all the elements that the article on creating a climate and a culture for sustainable organizational change addresses. We're talking about things like changing directives, training, maybe changing some of the computer systems to support the change. We're talking about reward systems that may need to be changed, and accountability systems. So those are the three levels, if you will, of change initiatives. Next slide. Now, the level of change influences the level of work and the time required to sustain or embed that change. As you move from a program to an organization, like I said, it's more work, both to accomplish the change and to embed the change. Next slide. So the question you have to ask is how much effort is worth it? Kind of weird question, but how do you know that your effort in embedding and accomplishing the change is worth what you're achieving? Again, the only way to do that is to be clear on the outcomes and how you intend to measure them and what success looks like. All right, next slide. So what? Yes.
Oh, okay.
So, why is the change worth sustaining? Again, it comes back to questions that already have been raised. What value does it add to the organization, to the community, and the people that we serve? What are the results? And are the results worth the investment? You have to think about these questions from day one and continually as you implement and monitor the impact of your efforts. Next slide. The other question you have to ask is, did you get where you needed to go, or did you get a little lost along the way? That's easy to do, too. You think you got a pretty clear map, and even when you do, you often find that there was a detour you didn't take into account when you were planning. So always be aware of where you wanted to go and where you are in relationship to that end. Sometimes we implement a change initiative just to test out an idea and test out an approach. And so when we do that, we really don't want to sustain that effort because it's a learning effort. What we want to sustain is a learning organization. So you may discover, you may have had a problem, for example, of retail theft and decided to take a problem-solving approach to that issue. And you may have had some impact, and really you thought of it in terms of a program. But as you step back and ask the questions that I just raised, what you might discover is that what was really important is not the impact you had on retail thefts, that was good, but the impact that the problem-solving approach had upon your officers and their excitement about their job and their investment in their job and the way that the business people began to feel about the police and began to cooperate with the police. So as you think about that, what, again, you want to sustain may not be the problem-solving against retail theft, but it's problem-solving. And how do you embed problem-solving within the organization? That's a different question than what perhaps you started out with. So, next slide. What level of change are you implementing and wishing to sustain? As you sit back and think about it, are you at a program level, a process or technology level, or an organizational level?
So, Nola, I'm going to jump in again. This is Dr. Pottinger. I liked what you said about the learning effort and the learning organization. And as I thought about this, what occurred to me is that really, based on the Schneider paper, one of the papers, that chapter 41 that you sent out earlier, they talked about a lot about very interesting aspects of climate versus culture in an organization. And the sense that I got from that theoretical approach is that if you have enough learning efforts going on, then doesn't that help lead to a learning organization? And, you know, I mean, a case in point, you mentioned one of the situations where you had a learning effort in Philadelphia. And, you know, if you've got a lot of problems to solve, for example, if you've got a lot of crime, and there's, you know, and the crime patterns and trends and MOs are changing, and that would tend, I think, to lend itself to an organization that would have a lot of learning efforts going on, and therefore would that help lead to becoming a learning organization?
Right, right. And I think what happens is as you begin to allow people to experiment, not just the bosses can experiment, and not just the people who have a great deal of discretion, which is often, believe it or not, are the officers, but everyone in between have the freedom to experiment, to test, and to innovate. Then what we're creating is a philosophical change within that organization that says it's okay to test something, it's okay to even fail as long as you share with us what you learn. And as we move along, we're changing the basic values of the organization and setting forth the value of experimentation and change itself. Now, I think there's also one of these balance points. I think what also happens, that can happen, and I'm guilty of this, is sometimes we push out too much change at one time and we overload. And people kind of back off and they go, wait a minute, what do you want us to do? Which way do you want us to go? So I think we need to balance experimentation with organizational sensitivity to change.
Okay, yeah, that's also a very good point. I know that at least in the theory I've read, in any organization, about 2% of the people are what we would call a change agent, and generally about 10% of the people can be counted on to support change. And then there's this, mass of people that are sort of neutral, and maybe some percentage that actually oppose change. But I think that's sort of just a general brush in terms of the distribution of people who are interested in change. And I was surprised actually that to see there was such a small number, just 2%.
Yeah. And I think, and you guys are out there, really working this effort and making change. What do you think? Do you think those percentages sound right to you?
Yes, they sound right to me, Nola.
Okay. All right. So as you begin to think about sustainability, it's important to understand the scope that you're approaching and what elements you really want to sustain in your organization. All right, next slide. Well, here's the news. Sustainability starts now. Now, whether you've just started a new initiative, whether you're in the middle of it or you're wrapping it up, wherever you're at, you should be thinking about sustainability. And the best time to start thinking about easy for me to say, sustainability is in the very beginning, as you begin to design your program or your process or your change, and you begin to implement it. So, next slide. So, like I said, there's no time like the present, and the time is right now to begin planning for sustainability. So what does that look like? Next slide. Well, you need to know both your strategy and your people. So here are some things that a sustainability strategy should look at. And that, if you look at it and you think, boy, doesn't that sound like an implementation strategy? Yes, and yes. Because what we're talking about is we need to understand and define success. What is success, and how do you know when you have it? And how are you going to communicate it? You need to talk about not just your outcome measures, but all the things that are being accomplished to achieve those outcomes. We also need to measure our outcomes and be public about it. You need to find a champion within your organization and maybe even outside of your organization, a champion who understands what you're trying to achieve and who has some power and influence inside the organization to help you accomplish it and can maybe even mentor you along. You need to identify and influence your stakeholders and make sure you have a plan to do that. And as already has been said, you need to demonstrate value. Why this effort should be sustained after the grant money is gone, and what it means to sustain it. So think about it. Think about it now, plan for it, and then begin to work it. I don't know if it's just policing, but I do know that police like to just, fire, ready, aim. So to get a police organization to back up for a minute and take the time to plan for sustainability is well worth the effort. You can't wait till the end of the project and then turn to your boss and say, so what do I do next? You need to be having that laid out and shared all the way along. Next slide. All right, so it does come down to people, doesn't it? People love to change. Well, that is when they want to. Next slide. And it's easier to get buy-in when you hit these 4 areas. First, what's in it for me? This is all about understanding the motivation. Why should the person you're asking to make the change actually do that? What's the motivation for them? Why should they be even willing to listen to you? What understanding do they need to know in order to do what you've asked them to do? Second quadrant, do I have what it takes? In other words, do the people that you're asking to make the change have the necessary skills and knowledge and understanding to exercise that change? Or do they need additional training? Do they need additional knowledge? Do they have the resources to do what you're asking? If not, you need to address that issue. Will I be rewarded? And this is not just about recognition, but it's also about organizational support for your change effort. And here it comes down to, will the organization support your effort? And that support comes through things such as changing directives when needed. It comes through things like setting up accountability systems and following through on the consequences, and changing perhaps performance evaluations and award systems. Here in Philadelphia, if you're involved in a shooting, God forbid if you shoot someone or you get shot, or if you rush into the face of danger to protect or serve another person, you're going to get recognized with a formal award. But what if you just really work hard consistently and use the problem-solving model and the principles of partnership and collaboration and really address a chronic problem that existed on your beat for a long time? What do you get then? Well, in Philadelphia, you didn't get anything. So we set up and established a new award, the Award of Excellence. It's been established for a while, and it's beginning to take hold. But again, it's saying, look, we acknowledge that police work is also about working with others and being excellent in what you do. And finally, do the bosses walk the talk? We can preach, we can demand, we can hold people accountable. But when we look up the chain and we don't see others, our bosses, acting in the ways that you tell us we're supposed to be acting, that disconnect is dangerous and will, defeat the change effort right away. So this is about total organizational change, the kind of change that the article addressed. So if you think about implementing change and sustaining change and addressing these 4 quadrants and making sure that you've done this, you're going to be able to sustain the change a little bit easier and a little bit longer. All right. I'm seeing some comments coming through here, and I'm not paying much attention. Somebody want to bring us up to speed?
Oh, there's a lot of little chit-chat going on, Nola, about organizational culture and readiness for change and things like that. It's a really fascinating topic.
Yeah. It certainly is. when I went into the District of Columbia, this was 98. Is that right? Yes. The District of Columbia had just been put under what was called a control board. In other words, it was being run by the federal government. God forbid, but a committee from the Senate. The department, the police department there, was one that found itself in a lot of disarray for a lot of reasons. Everything from the political influence of the former Mayor Barry to the lack of resources. And Charles Ramsey came from Chicago to Washington, and he was able to negotiate bringing in a couple of other people with him. I would guess maybe 10 people, no more than 15. So anyway, I was standing in the hallways one day in Chicago, and a captain came up to me, and he said, this is about 6 months after we came, "You know what they're calling you people?" And I said, I don't know who they are, and I don't know what people, but no. He said, you know, you people from Chicago. I said, what? Well, they're calling you the Chicago Hope. At the time, there was a TV show on about, I think it was a doctor show called Chicago Hope. So I thought, well, gee, that was nice, Chicago Hope, you know? And really, that's where that department was. It was hoping for something better and willing to try almost anything if it could, you know, lead to something better for the people in that organization and the pride, and rebuild the pride in the organization. About 6 months later, the same captain came up to me and he said, "You know what they're calling you now?" I said, "No, what are they calling us now?" "The Chicago Mafia." So it's easy to go for reception to when you start doing it to, oh, wait a minute, I don't know if I'm talking about that kind of change.
Yeah, but they're sustained.
Yes, yes.
I mean, the Mafia, they have sustained.
All right, next slide. So, all along, I've been talking about planning, acting, and sustaining. And that means, again, I'm repeating myself, but a sustainability plan should be part of your implementation plan. But if you didn't do it, that's okay. You can do it now. Next slide. So what are some of the questions you might want to address in a sustainability plan? What's the rationale for the change? What's the motivation? What's the reasoning? What's in it for me? What are the barriers and how will they be managed? Why should senior and executive leadership care? Are the bosses walking the talk? And how can you get them to do that? Can you manage up? What is your communication plan? How will you generate and maintain momentum? What will be measured and how? And how would you build a record of success? You need to try to address as many of these questions and the other ones that I've raised in the earlier parts of the presentation as soon as possible and begin working toward them. All right. So keep asking them, learn, and adjust as you go along. Next slide. Next slide. Hello? There we go. All right. So what are the biggest challenges you see right now in sustaining your change effort? This is an opportunity for you to throw out the kinds of things you're thinking about or the kinds of issues you see facing and see if others can help out.
Probably right here.
I've got a question. What I see so different over 30 years of police work in today's environment, budgets drive all policy debates, and the budgets demand change. And what tips or what have you seen in selling sustainability, tactics, strategy? What's been a toolkit for you? And I know you talked about stakeholders and community involvement, that's all big part of it. But dealing with city aldermen, city councilmen, county commissioners, what has been something that's worked for you in selling in this critical environment we all are in?
Well, I'll go back to the point that was made earlier by someone else, and that is demonstrating the value that you'll be able to provide by sustaining a particular change effort. And in this day and age, you might have to be willing to go in and say, I think this is so important for us to continue that I am willing to not do this, whatever it is. I am willing to stop this program and take this money and put in here. That's how much I think this is necessary. Reallocating officers and supervisors between programs. I think one of the things that this economy has done, or has required many of us to do, is to step back and ask those kinds of questions. Are there things that we are currently doing that if we had really had a choice, would we continue to do it? And maybe we don't have a choice. And how do we make those decisions? Along the same kinds of principles, we've talked about. What's being delivered? What is of value to our stakeholders? Now, sometimes we may think that a program is of little value. And I'm not picking on anyone, but I'll pick on one. Let's say Dare and Great. There's been some research that suggests that those programs are not as effective as they are warranted, could be, should be, or whatever. However, there's a lot of stakeholders who value Dare and Great, not because it reduces perhaps substance abuse among students, but because of the relationships that are built between police and students in the education sector and the law enforcement sector. So it's being able to step back, look at what's going on, see if there's alternatives and changes and willingness to horse trade, if you will, some less valuable initiatives for the ones you really think will make a difference. It is difficult. Here in Philadelphia, we're down about a little over 200 officers, and we've cut like $17 million in overtime. So a lot of the discretionary, a lot of the money and the staffing resources we had to experiment, to try something different while we kept the boat, sailing along, we don't have any longer. So now when a new program comes up or a new idea comes up, what also has to come up, okay, how can we do this within our existing budget, and do we stop doing something else in order to do this? So another reason why sometimes it's best to do small things, to test it, to get the results in order to push the bigger things. I'm not sure that's helpful to you, but that's some of the things that we've learned.
I think regarding that issue also, it's important to recognize you don't have to sway all the aldermen. In direct response to your question, the idea is to segregate, divide them, and find out who you can get to be your champion as far as going ahead with something, and put them out in front of it. You've got to swallow a little pride of maybe your idea, you got your stamp all over it and so forth. Get an alderman to come out on something that's going to be successful and at this time is funded, and you've got a win-win situation. Allow him to influence the other aldermen in other words, garner allies.
Right, exactly right. And now, if you're in say if you're a sheriff and you're an elected official, you have a little bit more flexibility than if you're a chief or a commissioner and you have to toe the line of your boss, the mayor. But
we are a sheriff. The problem with the environment is just like you said, giving up something to have another. It's just a very adverse environment, and this has helped. This value. It sometimes it's difficult to articulate things and measure out. Like in intelligence-led policing, it's difficult for us to measure prevention, the crimes we prevent.
Absolutely.
And but you've hit the points I needed. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Someone else.
This is Jack Charlier. One of the more interesting things I've seen is through the change process is the ability to quickly respond to what could be perceived as failures. So you have initial support for a change process, or you're underway with it. You've done all your readiness for change, obviously preceding that, and then and I just use the word failures. It's a simple term. Failures start creeping up, some of which may be viewed by external stakeholders And so kind of what action plan do you have then to respond to that in a timely manner so the change process doesn't get derailed? Because it may not actually be a failure, but you have stakeholders out there who are not interested in something going forward even when it does. And so how do you respond to that, and so that you don't die because one person made the front page of a paper and now your program, your process, or your organizational change is dead?
Right. So I think it comes back to being clear about what success is. And I think success is measured, can be measured, and should be measured by numbers. But success can also be measured by some of the more qualitative kinds of factors. So where you have community members who are willing to, if you will, give testimony about the impact that the program has had on them and their lives, or officers who are willing to stand up and say, look, I know, we're still figuring it out, but let me tell you, I have not liked my job the way I like it now. I mean, there's just, when I first came on, this is how I felt. Things have happened, and this program has really made a difference in the way I do my job and how I see my job. So there's, the qualitative kinds of efforts, and just the listing all the effort and work that's being done may also help. But most importantly, I think, is the willingness to stand up and say, yeah, okay, that one didn't work, but you know what we're going to do about it? We're going to do this. And we're learning from it. And we didn't make promises on everything to everyone, but we are willing to watch what we're doing, learn from what we're doing, and change and innovate as we go along. Just give us some time. You'll see the difference. Now, you got the naysayers. Nothing's going to persuade them. But I think, as someone had mentioned, as things begin to roll along, others, that middle group, especially if the momentum begins, that middle group will jump on board and help you out. I don't know if anybody from Philadelphia is on the line, but would you like to address that issue? Because it certainly is one that we've often dealt with here.
Yeah, Nola, it's Tom. There's three major points I just wanted to make that started with the change when you came to Philadelphia that you brought and have been successful in. And one of that is establishing a vision. And the vision just doesn't stay upstairs. It has to be effectively communicated right to everyone. And that takes time. But there's been a patience, and I think the vision is a key word, but patience is also key to any change initiative, and encouraging that not buy-in, but I would say the co-creation of making that vision really happen amongst everyone. Change just can't happen at the top, because if it only happens at the top, then it's just another short-term initiative, which our vocation is way too accustomed to. So I think that you've been successful in establishing a vision, and then getting that co-creation, establishing that buy-in all throughout the agency. But then a key piece that very rarely gets talked about in any change initiative, in a profession that is immediate results oriented, is the fact that there's a patience piece to this. Organizational change does not happen overnight, and that is difficult sometimes from people that have been in the job 20, 25, 30 years in many cases, that are used to needing a tow truck, and the tow truck shows right up. Needing an arrest, you go out and get one narcotics arrest. But when you really want to have this effective change, I think that the things that you've been very effective here in Philadelphia with doing is setting the vision, effectively communicating it, but then you've allowed the patience. You haven't forced it down anybody's throat. And with that is where you start to get people buying into it. Hey, this is a good way to do it. It's a much different way to do it, but it's just as effective. And so I think the patience piece often gets left out of these conversations, that change cannot and will not happen over a week or over a month or over 6 months. If the tree is really going to grow and really yield fruit, the roots have got to go into the ground, and that only comes with time and patience.
Thanks, Tom. Yes.
Nola, my name is Robert Garcia. I'm calling from the Far Texas site. I have a question or a comment on sustainability. In any other site, is social media like Facebook part of the success of showcasing the projects?
Oh, absolutely. I think the whole social media, I don't know what we call it, movement.
The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
Everybody?
Hello?
Yes, we're back. It sounds like one participant had a feedback loop there.
Yeah.
A big one.
Yeah, just, I didn't know if we got hacked or what here. All right. So the question was around social media. Yes, I think that is a emerging method of gaining support, sharing results, and building stakeholders. Here in Philadelphia, we really have worked hard on our social media presence, everything from a Twitter account to Facebook, with a YouTube channel. It is amazing that people do participate in that way, and I think that's only going to grow. One of my own personal thoughts when I have time to think is how do we set up a virtual community meeting, or how do we set up virtual problem solving? I don't care if you live in England or heck, even China. If you can help us solve a crime problem from a problem-solving perspective, join into the chat and let's see where we go. So I think social media is an important aspect that we need to understand and use more fully.
Hey, Nola, this is Chip. In the chat room, an interesting question bubbled up from one of our newer sites. I was telling everybody about something we learned from you very early on in smart policing about the requirement and the necessity to communicate many more times than you think you need to, and in many different formats and media.
Right.
And so the question that came back was, okay, how do we start the conversation, whether it's with leadership or with the rank and file in the department? So you have just some thoughts or some recollections on how you got that conversation started?
Well, so here in Philadelphia, let me start with the top and work down, if you will. The police commissioner holds a morning meeting. Every morning, all of the deputy commissioners and the police commissioners sit around the table. And after we have a conference call with our inspectors, that's where we begin to talk about, what's going on today, where we headed, new policy issues, and new programs. And how I see my role in that meeting, one of my roles, is to bring into that meeting not just new ideas, but evidence-based ideas. So I actually search for information and research, have other people kind of boil it down to a 1 or 2 pager that I think is important to share with the top. And so I do that at that level. Also, when Tom talked about the vision, that vision has to come, I think, from the top, but they just kind of sets the broad strokes of the vision for the department into the future. And how that begins to get really shaped and molded is through conversations all the way down. We have regular command staff meetings. The commissioner is out talking to individual officers and to supervisors. Oftentimes, we forget, at least I have to say that I see it happen, we forget the supervisors. Those supervisors are going to make or break your change effort. Sometimes we talk about the top, we tell the bottom what to do, and forget to clue in the supervisors. And what's going to happen? That officer is going to go to his sergeant and say, "Hey, Sarge, what do you think about this new effort?" And the sergeant is going to say, "I know nothing about it, kid. Go on and do what you usually do." So really involving the supervisor, whether that is through, we have, mandatory in-service training. We carve out time so that every person in the department gets the message that we want to get. This year, it's problem solving. It's not a lot of time. It's 4 hours. But every person in this department, 6,600 people, went through 4-hour problem solving training. How many will actually use it? Probably not 6,600, but at least they know that this is important enough that they have to sit through it and understand what we're talking about. We have, we put out a little paper newspaper, if you will, a news article. We have the intranet that we post. We have electronic roll call in which video messages can be posted, and we do. So it's, once you get the vision, once you get the, where we're headed, and then you start hitting those 4 quadrants. What's in it for them? Why is it important to them? What do we want them to do? What do they need to know in order to do what we want them to do? Are we supporting their effort, really supporting their effort? Are we making changes in other areas to support it? And are we walking the talk that we're speaking right now? So it's that constant looking out and looking in and communication. If somebody can solve the problem of communication within any organization, they more than made their million, because I think it's still a problem in most organizations.
Yeah, very good. Thanks.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Nola's Gary Cordner.
Mm-hmm.
In regard to what you were just saying, and also something you mentioned earlier, and in your experience, what's your insight on the receptivity inside and also externally, receptivity toward evidence-based arguments? We hear a lot about it. Are those kinds of arguments that something's actually been proven to work, or there's more evidence behind it than behind other things? Does that matter at all in all these debates?
So I work for Chuck Ramsey, and he's been talking about evidence-based practice before it became the in thing to do. So he's a true disciple of that, and so he talks about it, and he looks for it, and he asks for it when we have conversations with our people. I'm also hearing it outside of policing in the other realms of city government, of evidence-based practice, whether it's in health policy, educational policy, policing policy. So I think it definitely, the language is being used more and more. And I think in this day and age, again, with the tight economics, it becomes, not easy, but it becomes a little harder to say no when evidence can be placed in front of the decision makers, and you say, if you do this, this is what's likely to happen or not. Let me give you one example. The RAND Corporation has a calculator for the cost of crime on their website. And in there, you can put in the level of crime you have in your city, the index crime, and it does the calculations of how much that costs. And people are just shocked. I mean, here in Philadelphia, the cost of crime is almost $2 billion a year. Now, that includes, obviously, the direct costs, but also a lot of the indirect costs. But when you begin to say, look, like it or not, crime is happening. It's happening at this level, and it's costing us this much. In the article that they wrote, they also had a calculation in which, and again, you can always debate numbers, but if you add or decrease your sworn strength by 1%, what you can expect the impact on your crime to be. Well, I went back to look at that just recently because, like I said, we've reduced our head count and our overtime. And by category, it didn't match up. So we had, it wasn't the exact numbers for burglary or murder or so forth. But the bottom line was pretty damn close. So I think it should be, as you're able to use those kinds of arguments with people and demonstrate, that cops do matter. I think we saw that in New York, we saw that in L.A. I think you see it in Washington, D.C., that staffing does matter, and how many boots on the ground that you have does matter. And you can prove that with numbers. At least they can't say no so fast, and it forces them to think about it. I think difficult decisions are always going to be made by decision makers. What data does and what evidence does is increases the level of confidence in those decision makers for making the right decision. Anything else? All right. So for the last few minutes here, next slide, I want to share with you just a little bit more about what's going on in here in Philadelphia. And if you go to the next slide, and we'll just sit there for a little bit. Commissioner Ramsey came into Philadelphia in 2008, and so our efforts started then. And we set forth in January of 2008 a crime-fighting strategy. And in that strategy, we laid out a set of guiding principles. We said we are all about prevention, continuous improvement, collaboration, and at the time we used the term intelligent policing, but we are now using the term smart policing. And so what that means for us is as we begin to have conversations about, what are we doing and how we are doing it, if those principles aren't evident in the approach, then it's like, okay, why are we doing it? Okay, if it's not about continuous improvement, why are we doing it? If it's not about prevention, why are we doing it? And so forth. And it really influenced our strategy in 2008. We just updated that strategy in 2011. It's on our website. And it continues to drive how we think in terms of delivering police services to the city of Philadelphia. And core to that is that we wanted to make some very fundamental organizational and cultural changes here in the police department. And those changes consisted of something, everything from something as basic as geographical responsibility. In policing in most departments, you've got geographical responsibility usually at the police officer level in patrol. I mean, they usually have a beat or a sector or a division or a zone. You have a captain or a district commander who has geographical responsibility. You may have somebody in charge of that captain who has several districts who has geographical responsibility. But then after that, geographical responsibility kind of disappears until you get back up to the chief. And he's got geographical responsibility for the entire city. So what we've done is, we did it in D.C. and we did it here in Philadelphia, is to do away with the traditional bureau structure of a police department. We have two major, we call, for the lack of a better word, we call them groups. We have field operations under one deputy commissioner. Field operations has all of the operational responsibility, everything from investigators and detectives to patrol to special units. They fall under one person. One person is accountable for the delivery of police services. The second half of the house is organizational support. That's all the backroom stuff. That's everything from training to IT to personnel to procurement, etc. So that's the behind the scene, all the things that have to get done to support the people in the field. One person in charge of all of that. They've got their subunits. Then we have two offices. We have the Office of Organizational Accountability. That includes our IAD function, but also a quality assurance function, and we hold organizational ComStat meetings with that group. And then there's my office, Office of Strategic Initiatives and Innovations. That's it. That's our organizational structure. And what that does is it gives clear accountability to individuals. And it also says there's one group who's looking out into the future, helping us plan and directing us where we need to be going. Another group is making sure we're doing what we say we're doing, and we're doing it right. Within operational section, what we've also done down at the district level was to create police service areas. And so the other key thing that we wanted to do was to put the focus back onto an old term, I suppose, team policing. And within a PSA, so a police district could have anywhere between 2 to 4 PSAs. Most of them have 3. Each PSA is headed by a lieutenant, around 4 sergeants, and somewhere around 60 officers. Some PSAs will have more than that, some will have fewer than that. But that PSA team is responsible for delivering the police services within that PSA. That includes responding to calls for service, and we changed the way in which we dispatch so that a call within that PSA is to be handled by officer assigned to that PSA. Of course, there's always exceptions for in progress or extreme emergencies to go outside of the PSAs. But our PSA integrity is about around 70 to 80%, which is pretty high. That means 70% of the calls within a PSA is handled by a PSA officer. Why is that important? To us, that's important because it establishes geographical accountability. It lets the officers to get to know the community, that small geography that they're policing, to know it better, to know the people in there, to know the problems that exist in that area. We also expect that PSA team will do problem solving, and we set up something we call a PSA plan, in which the lieutenant works with his team and the community to develop a PSA plan around chronic problems of crime and disorder. And we meet regularly with the captains and the lieutenants about what's going on in their PSA and how they're implementing their PSA plan. We also established that every PSA team has to meet monthly with their community. Now, they can join into an existing community meeting if one's there, and they can also, if necessary, they establish a community meeting that they host. Again, the focus is not just to talk about, crime and what happened last month, but to start focusing on problem solving within creating partnerships within that geography. So those are major, major changes of geographical responsibility, team policing, data-driven problem solving, community partnerships, and accountability. Tom Hires, who spoke earlier here, is in charge of our PPD 2020 team. 2020 refers to the year 2020. And we set about a strategic planning effort that laid out where we want to be in the year 2020. And Tom and his team is helping drive that change for us. So our smart policing effort, when we saw the grant, we thought, oh, this is perfect, because we are about evidence-based practices, about analysis, and using our technology as best we can. So we saw the Smart Policing Grant as an opportunity to advance the kinds of changes I've just described. And so what we did with the initial grant was to test foot patrols, problem solving, and offender focus approach on addressing violent crime. Our district captains, we set out to them and said, here, according to the data, are where your hot spots, if you will, for violent crime exists. And here's the 3 approaches. Tell us, for those hot spots within your district, which approach you'd like to test. So they got to pick. We also said, by the way, know that some of these hot spots will not be tested because they're going to be our control group. But you won't know, you won't know which ones. Well, I guess you will, because you're not going to be working in them. But again, we had all the way from the top permission to say there's going to be some areas in this city that are going to be policed the way they've been traditionally policed, while other areas are going to be policed differently. We had to do that in order to understand what works where and why. So we had 20 foot patrols, we had 20 problem-solving areas, and 20 focus offender areas and 20 control groups. We ran for almost a year the various approaches. Temple did the analysis and found that, once again, foot patrol was effective in reducing violent crime. Problem solving also reduced violent crime and property crime. Both of the property crime was found to be a little bit larger reduction than violent crime. Whereas the offender focus, we didn't find any real results to talk about. So we used the problem solving to demonstrate our principles of prevention, continuous improvement, let's learn from what we've done, collaboration, working with our partners in doing this, and being smart about it. So that's what we did with our Smart Policing grant. Now, are district commanders, are captains still using foot patrols? Are they still doing problem solving? Are they still working and focusing on offenders? Yeah, and they're doing that because they've learned themselves that these approaches are effective, or if not effective, how they want to change them with the hope of making them more effective. They're not doing it because we say you have to have 10 foot patrols. But now the district captains are saying, I need foot patrols, I need more officers, I'm going to reallocate my officers to foot patrol because it works. And so for me, that's what smart policing is about, and sustaining smart policing is sustaining the underlying principles within the organization, so that whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now, it may not be about problem solving, but it is about testing, learning, and innovating. That's what we're trying to sustain here in the Philadelphia Police Department. Next slide. So let's go on to the next one. Here's what I think we're at. And Tom mentioned this. He just stole my thunder a tad bit early. Sustainability is really hard work. You all know that. It's hard work that requires patience, persistence, and partnerships. You got to have those three things going. And you need to be willing to acknowledge your lessons, celebrate your victories, and share your successes. And the bottom line, it doesn't matter who takes credit as long as there's credit to be taken. So that's what, as I think about sustainability, the bottom line really is. It's patience, it's persistence, and it's partnerships. Next slide. So Chip put this one in. Chip, do you want to talk to this one?
Sure. I was just thinking, going through Nola's slides, that there are actually several examples of how some of our smart policing sites are working towards sustainability or promoting sustainability or putting their best effort forward in terms of sustaining some of the practices that they have tested, and they've put in place and tested. So just a few things came to my mind. I know there are several of our sites that either immediately upon launching their initiative or some way through the first 6 or 8 months, department-wide trainings were held at different levels, again with the supervisors, with the sergeants. As Nola has said several times, you can't beat incessant communication about what you're trying to do and whatever successes that you're having. There are some departments that have made some actual visible, tangible operational changes. A couple of them have, I can't say that they've taken over the CompStat meetings, but SPI and smart policing practices have become a regular part of these CompStat meetings. There's a few departments that have actually started to rework their officer evaluation, their performance evaluations based on smart policing concepts. A couple departments have taken some of the lessons that they've learned through their projects and created department-wide strategic planning teams. I know there's one who was so intrigued with the notion of intelligence-led policing that, separate from their smart policing initiative, they initiated a department-wide year-long, it may still be going on, planning team to look at how they can integrate intelligence-led policing throughout the entire department. And for a lot of the smart policing site, the collaboration with the researcher is something new and innovative for them, and several of them have opted to maintain the relationship with their researcher even after the final report has been turned in. So that's just a couple of things that came to mind. I'm sure there's much more that could be said there, but anyway, that's where all that comes from. Just some examples that I could think of based on my understanding of the site.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, final slide. So, this brings me to the end of my part of the conversation. My contact information is on there. Feel free to either email me or call. Usually email is better, but I'll be glad to talk further about anything that you may have that comes to mind. And I hope this was informative and useful, and that at least you can walk away with a little bit to help improve and enhance your efforts in your city and your police department. Any questions or comments?
Nola, I'll just make one comment. This is Dr. Pottinger. I think one of the things that I didn't see mentioned in the presentation, at least not explicitly, was the opportunity to help to basically clarify values in an organization. And I know about 30 years ago, the values clarification stuff was really popular, and it's it to an extent maybe coming back, but I think we talked around it quite a bit in this discussion today. But I just as a practical example, my daughter is over in the Middle East working for a non-profit, an NGO, and they specifically intentionally choose very difficult areas to do outreach. And one of the first things they do going in is they meet with people in the community and help them to express their own values for what they want in the community. And again, I think I heard that, from different people in different police departments on the call today. I heard it from in your presentation, but I just thought that it might be worth explicitly making a point that step of helping people in a community, stakeholders, as well as an organization itself, within an organization, to clarify their values. What is it that they want? I think that's something that at least my daughter's convincing me is valuable.
I totally agree. Here, we had that kind of discussion early on back in 2008. And on the police officer's patch, there's honor, service, and integrity. And the overwhelming consensus was those are our values. They have been our values. We need to reinforce and stress them. And it became very important when we had a really rough year and series of, frankly, corruption cases going on. And being able to go back and with our own people and stressing, hey, these are our values. This is what we're about. We're about integrity. We're about honor, and we're about service. If you're not about that, then you don't belong in this organization, and it's hard to argue against that. And so not only the commissioner had to make some really tough choices. Well, they really weren't tough choices. I mean, the decision was obvious, but yet, nonetheless, they're difficult. But being able to go back and rely and to reinforce what the values are of this department in making those decisions, I think really helped the department get through a very tough time, both in the department and outside with the community.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Well, I want to thank everyone for hanging in there with us. This is my first time doing a webinar. Very interesting. And again, if you have any questions or want to talk about anything, feel free to contact me.
That's great.
Thank
Thank you very much, Nola. I think that was one of our more interactive and stimulating webinars. So I do very much appreciate the time that you put into it. I want to remind everybody about completing the evaluations that Vivian's going to send out fairly soon. We did have a question during the presentation about whether we can share the list of people who participated in this webinar, and I think we can provide the names and the email addresses unless anybody has an objection. But it's certainly a very strong goal of smart policing to generate interaction among the sites and among the participants and create what we call communities of practice. So we're very much in favor of sharing that information if it's okay with the people on the line. And I did hear a couple times some interesting conversation around social media. I just want to take a moment to say that this is an area, for reasons that are probably very obvious, that smart policing is very interested in. We're going to devote some attention to it at our upcoming meeting. And I know Vivian, who is kind of spearheading a lot of the work that happens on our website, is doing a lot of research into social media applications of various kinds. So as you're filling out your evaluation forms, if some kind of activity or a webinar around effective use of social media would be of interest, let us know that, because I think we're gearing up to be prepared to do something along those lines. Okay? Really good audience today, good participation. We had over 60 people on the line, which we think is absolutely fabulous. We thank everybody for your time and your interest.
Hey, thank you.